I want to thank everyone present for being here with us for this TRaCE McGill event for PhDs in engineering. We're really happy to have three fabulous panelists with us. It is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Paul Yakinen. Professor Yakinen is the Tomlinson Professor of Shakespeare Studies at McGill, and he's also the director of TRaCE McGill. He's also been the director of all the other TRaCE projects. He's a true pioneer in thinking about the future of the PhD and PhD outcomes, PhD tracking. So we're really happy to have you with us, Paul, and thank you for introducing our moderator for today.
Thank you, Mary-Claude. It is a real delight to be here. I just want to say that the guests, the honored guests who've come back to campus by way of Zoom to be with us today have the coolest narratives in the world on the TRaCE website. They're doing such wonderful work. So I'm just delighted that you guys are here to talk with us. Lynn Hine is a grad student in mechanical engineering. I'm really delighted, Lynn, that you're able to moderate this session. Lynn is on the board of POW, okay? Promoting opportunities for women in engineering, helping to make change. So I'm gonna hand things over to you, Lynn. Have a good time.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So welcome all, and thank you for attending this event. As Paul mentioned, my name is Lynn, and I'll be moderating this event on behalf of POW. So as Paul mentioned, POW stands for Promoting Opportunities for Women in Engineering, and it is a student-run group, and POW's goals are essentially to encourage the presence of women in engineering and also to work to inform undergraduate as well as graduate students about many career opportunities available to them in the field. And now to get started, dear panelists, could you please give us a quick introduction about yourself? What was your PhD on and what is your current position? And why don't we start with Adya?
Hey everyone, it's so very happy to be back here to share experiences with the current graduates. So I am a chemical engineer basically. I did my PhD. Before doing my PhD, I worked in the industry in nuclear plant for like 6 years. And then I wanted to pursue research. I came to my PhD here at McGill, and it was again in chemical engineering and boiling heat transfer, where I used nanofluids and laser textured surfaces to enhance boiling heat transfer. After my PhD, I went back to industry again, but this time industrial research. So I worked with Saint-Gobain for like 2.5 years. But my whole reason for going for a PhD was to become an academician. So I've moved back to the academy, and now I've started a postdoc position here at Polytechnique in Montreal just this month. Yeah, that's me.
Perfect. Mehrnoosh, do you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm really thrilled today to be here. It feels really good to be back after a few years. I graduated in 2017 from Civil Engineering Department. I worked on engineered nanoparticles. I studied their fate in the environment. Before that, I studied chemical engineering and nanotechnology back in Iran. And today I work in Luxembourg with the government of Luxembourg Ministry of Environment. I'm a policy analyst, environmental policy analyst. Again, really excited to be here again. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Susane?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me and including me on this panel. I have maybe more slightly unusual path. I started off training as an architect and graduated in the early 90s. Had a pretty much 20-year career in multiple countries around the world, which also followed several children in several different countries, with the same husband, of course. Upon returning here in Canada, it had been a sort of longstanding wish of mine to complete a PhD. So that's what I did at McGill University, and I pursued my sort of passion in housing and cold climate housing, which led me to looking at housing conditions in the Arctic and more particularly in Inuit communities in Nunavut. And this led me to writing a PhD dissertation, which was called Building with IQ, which is an acronym for Inuit Kauyimaya Tukangit, which is a way of thinking that belongs to the Inuit culture, the rise of a hybrid design tradition in Canada's Eastern Arctic. Just realizing that there was a lot more than what met the eye and what media was translating for us. There was an unbelievable creativity and resourcefulness that I didn't know even existed. And there is a huge propensity to build and to correct all the inherent problems that sort of government housing was affording the Inuit communities in the remote Arctic. And so this led me to doing research, extensive research, and living out in the north, in the high Arctic, for several months every year for several years, and becoming very good friends with people in the Inuit community. And once I completed my dissertation, I started a postdoc at Memorial University in geography, no less, to be part of a group of researchers that are pan-national, that are looking at housing and homelessness across Indigenous communities, which allows me to continue my work in a self-building and actually linking self-building to well-being in remote Indigenous communities. So there you have it.
Very interesting, thank you. So my next question for you is going to be, what were the most important skills that you acquired during your PhD, and how? We'll go in the same order. So Adya, do you want to start again?
Sure. Okay, the best skills I acquired was probably, well, I was terrible at technical writing. So when I started my PhD, I was excited to be in the lab, try experiments, like build my setup, which failed like a number of times. But that was all exciting until I got results and I sat down to write my first paper. Or even before that, when I wrote my PhD proposal. It was, thanks to my supervisors, they helped me survive it. It was a riot. My PhD proposal was really bad. Now that I look back at it, I clearly understand how terrible it was. So the problem I realized, which I never knew I had, was connecting, like when I'm writing science, my brain wasn't processing the language. Like I could only think about science and write it, but it wasn't. And then my connections between in the article, the flow of stuff was really bad. So this was my first semester at McGill, and well, my supervisors, they helped me to survive this, as I mentioned. So they suggested me to take this graphose writing course for another semester. Well, in the writing course, things went really well because it was again random topics they would give, and I would write well. They were like, yeah, it's good, because I got a really good TOEFL score and a GRE score before I came here. So the English language skills were good, but still, when I came back to write my article, I was still bad. So then I figured out that my issue was that I couldn't connect these two. So like I would have read my article 2-3 times before sending it to my supervisors, but they would still come back to me saying that you hadn't proofread it. There were things that we figured out. By the way, my supervisors were Professor Sylvain Coulomb and Professor Anne Kietzig. But then Professor Kietzig used to sit with me, like look through the article and show me like exactly where the issues were. Then what really helped me was to basically listen back to my stuff. So I used like Google Translate or options of from Word to read out loud, and to listen back to it, like what I had written. And that really helped me to figure out like, okay, this was the problem. While I read it, it never occurred to me, but listening back to it, and I think it proved when it was my second article coming out, the first draft went through the supervisors very smoothly. So this is something I acquired. And I guess until then, writing was really boring to me. Then I figured out that writing is when you really articulate your thoughts and you put down your research in the best way. So I think that's the best skill I acquired. It's technical writing.
Wow. Mehrnoosh, do you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I think my story is that I switched gear fundamentally. I had a technical background. My PhD was environmental engineering, and I wanted to do environmental policies. And through talking to people, I realized I made to believe that there's a huge obstacle, and that's lack of experience, and the lack of certain competence and overqualification in other competence. So I was very far away from my dream of landing an environmental policy job. So the skill that I acquired and realized that I really need was communication skills and interpersonal skills. And as soon as I found out, I started working on it. I did a lot of volunteering on campus. I signed up for McGill Toastmasters. I finished the communication the manual on communications, and did coordinate a few conferences on campus with in a group of graduate students. We did the UN Model Conference in 2015. I became the president of Civil Engineering Graduate Student Society in 2016, 2017. And through all of this, I think I addressed that skill that was lacking. And I think later on, it really helped me to land the job I really wanted.
Great. Yeah, I feel like we're definitely lucky here at McGill to have all these great resources available to us that help us in getting better at communicating science to technical people, but also the general population.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Susane?
Lynn, could you just repeat the question?
Yes, of course.
About
what were the most valuable skills you acquired during your PhD, and how?
Mm-hmm. So I think that the most important skills that I developed, there were so many. It was really probably changing my lens of the way I looked at things. I had an a priori for what was happening in the North, and what I found in the North was entirely different. I started thinking of post-catastrophe reconstruction as a theme or an interest of mine. You know, I felt like maybe that's what I was going to find in the North, but that's not at all what I found in the North. And so I think the skill was really in listening to people and understanding how important it was to allow voices that had not been yet heard, be heard. And through my work, and long periods of time of spending time with the people that I had discovered, would just transform my way of thinking about everything, about what we think of our North, what we think about poverty, what we think about the built environment, what we think about rubbish scattered around the towns, the communities up in the North. Let's say my initial reaction was completely transformed with time and listening and storytelling. And so I guess the skill would be to know how to tell a story, to listen to stories being told, and to understand the real importance of an oral tradition, which exists very much in communities. So other than the obvious that my colleagues have stated, which is really knowing and understanding how to communicate science and how to write about science or data or discoveries, it's first and foremost understanding what it is you want to be talking about and what voice you want to translate, and how to do that. So lots of skills. Lots of skills have to be acquired when you're doing a PhD, but I would say the other thing is, perseverance and often feeling like you're not going to make it or to get there, and you always feel like you're making one step forward but then 2 or 3 steps back. You finish by very, very incrementally, ever so slowly moving forward. And so I think that's
that's definitely a very valuable skill to acquire. So next, many questions that we received from people registering for this event asked about the transition from your PhD studies to the job market. So how was this transition for you, and how did you approach it? And this time we're going to start with Mehrnoosh.
So that's a really good question, because that was, I think, a challenge of mine when I was a PhD. I knew I wanted to do environmental policies, but I just didn't know how. I started talking to people, and like I mentioned before, right away I was made to believe that there's a huge obstacle. I don't have the experience, and in talking to people, I was more and more discouraged than actually encouraged, because I was told, well, your background is too technical. You don't have experience for policy, so why don't you just do technical work, engineering? That's what you're trained in. Why don't you remove your PhD after graduation? Just forget it. And I'm saying this maybe because it would resonate with some of the students, and maybe they hear it, so maybe it's encouraging for them. Remove your PhD, apply with your master's. Or I was told, change your first name to a nickname. It's too difficult. They can't figure out you're a female, you're a male, where you're coming from. It's just too weird. Change that. So a lot of these things, and on top of that, you're not competent and you're overqualified on a lot of jobs, and you're just not competent for what you want, which is environmental policies. As soon as I figured that out, I realized that I don't want to be jobless after graduation. So that's why I started doing a lot of extracurricular activities. Did McGill Toastmasters, did a few conferences with the other graduate students, did all of these volunteering jobs in order to say that I'm capable of taking on a project, implementing it on time. I'm not just good at working in the lab and doing research. I'm good at communicating. I'm good at doing projects and analyzing things. And I think that somehow it was fruitful. I got what I wanted, and what I want people who are listening today, just to take one thing out of this, is that I made it out of scratch with really no network, no connections, just studying really hard and working really hard. And I want them to know that if you know what it is that you want to do after a PhD, and you're persistent and determined to find it, you're just going to land it. Don't get disappointed. Talk to people, reach out to people. There's going to be always people who are going to give you good advice. There's going to be discouraging things, but there's going to be people who are going to take your hand and help you to get there. But start early on, and I think that's what I did. From second, third year, I identified what I wanted to do, and then started working around it, what I need in terms of competence and skills to land it.
Yeah, that's definitely a very great piece of advice. Thank you for that. Susane?
So that's kind of a strange story after the PhD. So I don't know, since I come from an engineering architecture background, sort of more scientific, but my work during my PhD really hovered between being both being science, being sort of the harder science, quantitative, but it was also very qualitative. I ended up sort of leaning toward the qualitative side, in that I became very, very interested in how people felt in their built environments. And even though for my postdoc, I originally applied to an engineering school in Denmark, where I was able to continue to develop this idea that I was developing with Inuit friends on building a kind of building system that they could self-build that reflected their daily life or their way of living, or the way they saw themselves living in this era, that had nothing to do with the government housing, because they're so interested in living in non-square buildings and buildings that were sort of more attached to the land. I was developing that, and a very funny thing happened in the end of my application. I was in Europe at the time and didn't have a proof of my residency, and I ended up being disqualified from the funding agency that didn't know where I was living. And so to make a long story short, I ended up being asked to do a postdoc at the Department of Geography at Memorial University because of my background in architecture. And somehow things just fell into place. I'm really doing everything that I want to be doing ultimately, even though I didn't get the postdoc that I initially intended on. And these things happen. And sometimes these things that are incredibly frustrating because they're bureaucratic mishaps end up having sort of a positive outcome. So it all worked out in the end. And as far as what to do postdoc, that's an interesting opportunity as well, which is if you don't want to have a pure academic career, so sort of following the tenure track position in a university, which I don't want to do. I am going to be an adjunct professor where I'll be able to just continue doing research and then work with a think tank or an institute, a Nordic Studies, Indigenous Studies Institute. So there are many options for post PhDs that are not your typical academic positions.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear that you got to where you wanted to be despite the obstacles along the way.
There are obstacles.
Adya, what about you?
Thank you, Mehrnoosh. I think your story was very motivating, and I think I also needed that. I wanted to go into academics right after my PhD, so I was applying for postdocs all around the world, and I did not get any. There were positions that my professors told me about, and they were like, "You're definitely getting this because that's your field of expertise, and you're getting this." None of them. So then, from another network that I had, like at McGill, why I mentioned the story is, again, it would help one of the graduates here. Is you never know who would help you out, who would introduce you to a job, right? So this was one of our postdocs in the lab, in another lab in the department, whom I used to meet in the lab. So we met somewhere, and she was working with Saint-Gobain research in North America. So she mentioned that, well, you know what, why don't you apply? We are taking new researchers now. I didn't want to go into industrial research, but well, that was the path that was kept for me. So I wanted to go back to India though. So she gave me this contacts of those people in India, and I sent my CV. I was called for interview, and there I started. But I knew that I wanted to go into academics. Well, when I started industrial research, this was also something like very different from academic research, because in industry research happens, but that's in the direction of business with profits. People want to increase their process yields, develop new products, but not. It's like a big weight on the cost part coming in there. So it was a totally different atmosphere, and I think being very open to learning was the key there to succeed. So after being there for like 2.5 years, I still kept applying for postdocs and academic positions, and finally, I got a postdoc position early last year, but again, due to the COVID, the pandemic, I couldn't make it. And again, I tried again, and I got it this year. So I was almost, I was almost close to my 3-year deadline after finishing PhD, because I graduated in 2018 March, and it was almost at the right time that I could get into a postdoc. So yeah, here I am, and I hope my journey is still not completed. I want to get into academics, so I hope I get a tenure track position.
Great. Again, I'm glad to hear that you ended up where you wanted to be, despite, again, many obstacles along the way. So my next question is going to be, so we heard you talk about your current positions in the meantime. How would you say has your PhD helped you in your current position? And this time we're going to start off with Susane.
Oh, well, it's everything. So I guess, you know, to get into the postdoc, you absolutely need the PhD. And certainly the topics are very related. And so what I'm doing now, you know, with these large group researches and my own independent research, are really stem out of what I've done for the past 10 years, you know, since I started my PhD. Yeah, I guess I can't answer any differently.
No, totally.
I'm sorry. It's just.
Adya, what about you?
So in my current position, where I started my postdoc, is just hardly a month old. So I would say what I did right after my PhD. So I think the best skills that from PhD that helped me in the industry was delving deeper, because there were like process issues, which I cannot go really, it's confidential stuff. I can't talk much about it, but it was like, you know, maybe something looks very evident, but it was not really that being the issue. So going deeper is something which I think I got it from the PhD, like not to only look at the surface and just look at parameters and say like, oh, maybe this is the issue, but then studying it completely in detail and figuring out, like comparing between the different plants. All of this came probably as a skill that I acquired during PhD. But something even fascinating I observed now that I joined this postdoc, it's hardly 3 weeks, but it was an easy transition. Like getting back to the lab, I already started running experiments, and like, so I think, yeah, that's again something that, you know, 4 years of being in the lab and like enjoying experiments. So I think that's also something. But if you ask me specifically what skill, as Susane said, it's hard to say what skill exactly, but it's a training. It's a training of learning something new without hindrance. Like you're being open to learning. That's something I think I learned during my PhD, and I could apply it in the life after. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, and it's great to see that you're so happy to be back in the lab.
Yeah.
Mehrnoosh?
Yeah, I can't agree more with Adya. She had a really good point on delving deeper and being open to learning. Part of the PhD is that knowledge that you acquire, and that really does help me every day, day to day. I work on chemical policies, and the knowledge of chemicals I acquired during PhD. But the other part of it that I think, when I was a student, I was missing to understand, and I want all the PhDs to understand that, is what Adya said, and the fact that PhD is a training, that when you come out of it, you have this analytical skills and this versatility, this drive for investigation, delving deeper, like Adya said, that not everybody else has. I really do believe that a lot of organizations, corporations, governments, do need more PhDs than they think they need. You can add value, you bring a new perspective, a new investigative perspective, a new analytical perspective that is really valuable to any type of organization. So believe in those skills, and I do believe that you as a PhD are going to come out with this set of skills. It's going to help you in your future job.
Yeah, totally. So before we open up the floor to questions from the audience, I have one more quick question for you. If there's one thing, if there's one thing you wish you had known before starting your PhD, what would it be? And Adya, do you want to go first?
Not to be disheartened at failures. Innumerable times that I've failed, and I think I panicked a lot initially, but then slowly I think I learned failure is only teaching me that, well, this method doesn't work, and then I just need to look for reasons for it so that I can find new ways open.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something that I learned initially. It was hard. Failures were too much, but then yeah. So that's something I think probably it was the way I was brought up, or I don't know. If I had known that, it would have been better. Otherwise, it was all good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that you need to learn that it's part of the process to fail many times.
Exactly.
Mehrnoosh?
Knowing that you're going to be okay. You're studying in a really good university, so you have plenty of opportunities. When you're in it, it's for me it was hard. You sometimes you really feel isolated. You feel like it's just a cycle of failing and failing. But that reassurance that we're going to be okay, and we are okay, and the new generation of PhDs are just going to do great. They're going to be the future leaders, and I want them to know it and to believe in it, because it's true.
Yeah, no, the PhD is definitely a roller coaster, and it's important to, even though it's difficult, to keep a positive state of mind in times where things don't go so well. Susane, do you have any advice or anything you wish you'd known before starting your PhD?
Well, I think there are so many paths we can take, and there's so many people that we speak to that will advise us to go in one direction or another direction. And I think what I would have loved to have perhaps known more early on in my career as a researcher is that the path that you yourself feel is the path you should take is probably the right path for you. And it's as valuable as anybody else's vision of what you should be doing. And so I would say as a woman and as someone who often turns to other people to decide for them, perhaps too often, I think it's important to note that you yourself will make the right decisions in the way you want to pursue this study. And it is in fact a study that belongs to you and is yours, and it's the one that you're going to be spending all this energy on. And so you ought to be really passionate about it. And it's really, if it comes from you, and I think and easier to follow through. So I would say knowing or having more confidence in myself and my judgment on how I wanted to pursue it, who I wanted to pursue it with, and my vision of it was just as valuable as anybody else's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely some great advice. Thank you. So having a look at the time, if there are any questions from the audience, feel free to, as I mentioned, use the raise hand button and I'll ask you to unmute yourself, or you can use the chat function and I'll read your question out loud. You can direct the question to our 3 panelists or just to one panelist specifically. It's up to you. I'll wait a bit in case someone is typing. If there are no questions, I have more questions prepared for you, so I can just keep going and asking you questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Elena.
for Mehrnoosh. So if I understood correctly, you are working in Luxembourg now, that's right?
That's right.
So did you end up there because you applied to different countries trying to find a position in environmental policy? Or what was the strategy to end up in environmental policy?
Good question. So I knew I wanted to do environmental policy. Then I knew I wanted to work for UN. I know it's a bit specific, but that's how I was really thinking. And so I started looking at the UN website, the type of jobs they offer, the type of contracts, how I can get into, and I started talking to people. Did the UN model conference on the campus for the undergraduate students, and through that gathered more information, the type of skills the UN system usually requires. Then found somebody through friends of friends who's a program officer in UN Montreal, and talked to her. And then I started applying for internships. So I aimed for internships at UN, and I landed one in Geneva. Right after I finished my PhD, I flew to Geneva. I started a 6-month internship with United Nations Environment Program. After that 6 months, they offered me a consultancy contract for 2 years. And I worked with them for 2 years. I traveled a lot. I worked with a lot of great people. And it all started with that internship. And after that 2-year contract, I got an offer in Luxembourg. So that's how this all happened.
Linked to the UN or separate?
No, this is a completely different one. This is with it's a Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, and we work very closely with the Ministry of Environment of Luxembourg. And this I landed just through applying again. And we had moved to Luxembourg because my husband had got a job in Luxembourg. So after Geneva, we moved to Luxembourg, and so I started, applying at this. I landed and I took it because I thought this is a really nice opportunity.
Thank you for sharing. That's a very interesting path.
No problem.
Are there any other questions? Oh, we have a question in the chat. I guess this question is for everyone. How do you expand your network? Susane, do you want to start with that question?
Well, that's, I think simply the networking comes from a few different ways of doing it. Would be going to conferences or participating in conferences. That's been a tremendous eye-opener and mechanism to meet people in your field. So I did an awful lot of conferencing around the world during my PhD and in the past 3 years. And I would say LinkedIn is a must, and that allows one to expand on connections for sure, and just continuing to communicate with with colleagues and with the people within your university if you're doing a postdoc, or and it's amazing who knows who and how small the world is when you're at that level. So everybody knows everybody, around the world, and I think the COVID has shown us that through Zoom, through these university platforms, and through LinkedIn, we're incredibly close-knit, and everybody is really willing to help you out or to give you another contact, and it just snowballs. And yeah, so I think those are the main resources. But conferencing and preparing conferences and speaking at conferences, and of course writing presentations and writing articles or writing books is also a great way.
Yeah, hopefully we'll soon be able to attend conferences again and host conferences again. Adya, any advice on networking?
Yeah, given the current situation, I'm just trying to, I guess, yes, going to conferences, but not only like conferences. Up to me, I felt like being in touch with not just your own lab mates and your just your own whichever lab you work in, but it's the extended department. Like you would have so many different colleagues working in with the different supervisors, but you might meet them, and so there is always a connection in your research. Like you can have conversations. So that's one way that you can build your network. At least that's how I did, and it has helped me. Otherwise, it is reading articles. Like for me, it's like reading articles, and if I find somebody's work interesting, I get in touch with them. If I want to know more, or that's another way that I have maintained relationships. So I guess that's also one way of networking, because but I don't know how comfortable it would be for everyone to try. But yeah, conferences, attending workshops, reading into your specific field, and getting in touch with people. To me, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely about taking that extra step, moving out of your comfort zone to connect with people.
Yeah.
Mehrnoosh?
To be very honest, I'm actually bad at this. I'm really bad. I was bad at this. I think I'm still bad at networking. When I came to Canada, I didn't know anyone, so I had no network, and I was bad at it. I think it's a very good question, and it's a really good skill if you can develop to make contacts and keep the contacts. I think it's easy to make contacts, but it's actually keeping them. It's the part that is a bit challenging. But what I personally did, I connected with people on LinkedIn. A few times what I did is that I connected on LinkedIn with them, and then I sent them a message and asked them for informational interviews. I did it a few times when I came to Luxembourg, and a few other people actually connected with me through that. They asked to talk to me about what I did, and I think that's a good way. People often are willing to share their stories, and you can try that out. As if the profession of someone interests you, just message them to talk to them for 20 minutes. And then if you can find ways to keep that contact and keep it alive throughout time, in future, they may actually help you. They may find something in somewhere that they may, forward to you, say, oh, by the way, I thought of you. So that's what I tried, and it worked in a sense. But generally, I'm not great at this. I know it's difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's not I guess some people will enjoy it. Others are struggling a bit more, but I think it's definitely a thing that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And also knowing about the different strategies and tools that you can use to expand your network. So I received one more question in the chat. Could you share about your experience as a woman pursuing an engineering PhD during your studies and now also in your current positions? Adya, do you want to start?
Sure, that's a good question. And it's sad that we still ask these questions, which shows that the difference that exists. So before my PhD, I worked in the nuclear industry, which was 99% male dominated. We were like hardly one or two women in the field. It was hard. It was really hard to fight, and to become a control engineer wasn't easy, because that's how the world sees it. Oh no, you are a woman, you can be in the training department. So, which is something I didn't want to compromise on. I'm a chemical engineer. I wanted to operate the plant. So I went through the training process, and successfully I became a control engineer. But then, every day I felt like I had to prove that I am capable. And it's not something that you would be happy to do every day, right? Like you don't want to prove, you're good and you do your work, but sometimes you had to prove yourself. But what I felt different was I came for my PhD, It wasn't hard. Like maybe it's because I went through a harder phase that I never felt any kind of gender bias during my PhD, and even better after I completed PhD, when I went to the industry back again. I don't know if it is like, people believing that, oh, she's a PhD and she is much knowledgeable. I don't know if it is that, but my opinions were always welcomed. And what I learned is, if you have the knowledge, like if you know that you know in and out of it, nobody can stop you. So it's first that confidence that you need to give to the receiving end, that you know what you're speaking, and to those things that you don't know, you don't know. And I think that's something which I felt that happened to me after my PhD. That like I never felt. Again, I went back to the industry where I was working in the float. Like that's where the CVD process happens. The float, when I need like temperatures of 700, 800 degrees Celsius, and in the float production line, there were no women. Even across the globe, like there were like 5 to 7 plants that I worked, but there was nowhere there were women. But I never felt at any point like it was all a huge team of men that I managed, but everybody was open to and listening and debating, and it was always positive. So I guess the key is to be knowledgeable. This is what I've learned.
Yeah, totally, and that's great to hear. Susane?
Well, I would echo that as well. When I was starting off in my undergraduate, which was engineering school, we were 15% women, and so women were novelties, and but never really had an issue with that. We were as successful as the men, so it didn't seem to be a hindrance. In fact, I quite enjoyed it in those years. It was fine. Went into architecture school at the master's level, and we were pretty much half women, half men. And then at McGill, well, it is what it is. It's probably hasn't changed that much in the past few years. And now I'm in a department of geography, where we're predominantly women. So I've seen the entire spectrum. Every environment is an interesting environment. I think just like my colleague has just pointed out, when you know what you're doing and moving forward, it doesn't really matter. I feel the same way as Adya mentioned. It's amazing that we're still talking about this today in 2021. It's I think in academic circles, I don't feel that there is much of an issue. I think it's out in the world where you encounter perhaps a different reaction to what you're doing, but certainly when you're a researcher, I don't feel it one way or the other as being a benefit or a hindrance. In fact, in social, when you're dealing with qualitative data, I would say being a woman is quite an asset, because we have maybe more typically a very gentle way of posing questions and obtaining that kind of data. In the field of construction, which is also part of my work, I think no, I mean, I don't see it as being a problem one way or the other. I guess that is what I would say.
Okay, great. Mehrnoosh?
The question was the challenges that the women may face?
Yes, during your PhD studies and now in your current role also.
In my PhD, I would echo the same perspective. I didn't feel that by any way, because I was a woman, there was any difference or hindrance. But at work, there are certain things, and not that you would feel it, but there are statistics that suggest that things are not quite equal. There are gender imbalances that exist, unfortunately, but it's improving, it's getting better day by day. And I think it depends on where you're working. For example, when I was working for the UN, a majority were female. A lot of female managers, directors, high-level diplomats were female working for the environment. So it was very empowering. It didn't matter that you were a man, a woman. It just really didn't matter. But in the current work environment, it does matter. Women are less likely to go up the hierarchy. Basically, in our institute, we have less than 12% of women who are managers. And the chances are slim that you go become a manager, become a director in a certain organization. And these are the realities that exist. But all in all, we have come so far to the extent that it's not surprising for women to study engineering, be engineers, be managers, work in a male-oriented, male-dominant world. And I think the confidence and knowledge that just exactly that Adya and Susane mentioned, it's the way to power through and know that you would get where you want to get if you're persistent enough. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, I agree. So if there are no other questions by the audience, I'd say this is the last chance to ask your question if you have any. No? Then Marie-Claude, do we have time for one more question from my side or yeah, okay. So just in general, PhD projects, the scope of the projects tend to be pretty narrow. From your experience, to what degree can a PhD project define what you can and cannot do later in industry or in academia? Mehrnoosh, do you want to start?
When I was a PhD student, that's how I felt, that it's so narrow. Nobody's going to accept me, but that's not true. Like I said, yes, you're working on a narrow thing, but at the same time, you're developing a wide range of skills. So you need to pass that mindset, and if you want to do something out of the scope of your PhD thesis, I've done it. A lot of people have done it. All I can say is that you can do it. You just have to know who to call, to talk to, what skills to build that you may be missing, and emphasize your strength. As a PhD, you're versatile, you're analytical, you're investigative, you can solve problems. Focus on those and then build everything around it, depending on where you want to work. Do you want to go to industry? You want to work for the governments? You're gonna get there. I had hesitations, but now I don't, because I did it. It worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like it brings all the aspects together that we discussed before in terms of having a positive mindset, networking, staying open-minded, etc. Adya, do you have anything to add?
It's the same thing, I guess. Like, it's not about that, as Mehrnoosh said, it's not like about the simple narrow project, but the number of skills you acquire. And it's here, for example, your PhD has a huge focus on XPS technique. It's not about being master in XPS, but you come out and you go to the industry, you see there are problems. Your brain is kind of wired and, in a different way, that you start thinking like of the possible techniques that you can use, and you can easily sort out things. This is something which I felt like after PhD. It's not like just the one thing. Your horizon of knowledge is much wider. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's the same thing as Mehrnoosh said. You have it's a training, right? Like as we said before, it's a training that you've gone through, and you've become capable of figuring out the whys and what ifs. So yeah.
Susane.
Yes, I would say that probably the PhD research project is like Mehrnoosh and Adya mentioned. It's really the training ground. It's and then when you do another research project, you're that much better at it, and you really know how to be more efficient with your time, and you're able to you understand the whole process because you've gone through the whole process, and your next research project may not last as long, but you'll go through all the motions in a more succinct way and probably be more effective. So I would say the PhD process or training is the worst research you'll have ever done, but it was the absolute necessary first step to really become a good researcher and understand. And as Adya said, your brain is wired. I see every day potential PhD projects in everywhere I look. There are just so many interesting things to be thinking about and doing and moving forward. So I'm just grateful to have become a researcher even at this moment in my career, and I have so much more to do and to voice and maybe I guess what I would finish with is, even if it seems very, very narrow, a scope. For example, I was working, in the high Arctic and Inuit communities, etc. There's so many common issues that exist in whatever research you're doing that are very, very similar to so many other environments, even if the culture, the language, the climate, the topography is completely different. It's the same thing, research is research across the board, and quantitative research and qualitative research is the same. We have the same fundamentals that we have to understand and go through, the same ethics. It's the PhD has been, I have to say, was one of the biggest gifts I could give myself in my life, and I'm just truly thankful that I was able to do it and to do this for myself at this moment.
Yeah.
So the best 6.5 years, other than my children, I should say, because they would be upset if I said it was better than that. No, it wasn't, but it was truly a blessing and a great gift.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I feel like those are the perfect words to close this event off with. So for the closing remarks, since it's already past 3:30, I'm just gonna pass it back to Marie-Claude and Paul. And I wanna thank all our panelists again for taking the time to be here and answering all my questions today.
Let me thank you, Lynn, and these three extraordinary guests. I'm so happy that this is being recorded because it needs to be seen by so many of the engineering grad students. I know they're swamped this week, but it also needs to be seen by the people on my side of the campus who don't know what engineering is and what you guys are doing, who you are, what you know. It's going to open their minds, my colleagues' minds, to the value of the work that you're doing. So I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your stories with us. Thank you.